Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me speak English today. Men have always played an important role in my career. From my first employer here in Stockholm, the Italian shoe importer, who taught me everything about running a small business, to my first manager in Silicon Valley, who hired me to do international sales for the tech company. He told me I never had to compromise my values in order to make a sale. To Momchil, my love and business partner, together we started 2 enterprise software companies and built an amazing family. About a year and a half ago, I started attending events for women in Silicon Valley, women in tech. These were fantastic gatherings. So many women coming together, sharing their stories, supporting each other. But there was one group of people that was noticeably absent: men. If we were talking about equality in tech and advancing women to leadership, where were the guys? I know who makes the decisions after being in tech for 20 years, and they weren't there. So I started to, I really wanted to look at the numbers, and I was new to this again. 74% of the professional computing positions in the United States were filled by men, while only 43% of the total professional occupations were held by men. If you look at leadership, 83% of the chief information officers and 95% of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies were men. That's a lot of guys. So why didn't I see them anywhere? And rather than speculating, I decided to go straight to the source. So I interviewed over 50 men in the tech industry, from CEOs to individual contributors that have worked in tech for 10 to 30 years. And to my great surprise, so many of them, all but one actually, thought that there was no equality in tech, but that it was fixable. And many of them agreed with me as I'm trying to achieve a 50-50 gender balance at all levels of the organization, from the bottom all the way to the top. But the sheer concept, like the idea of gender equality and female empowerment, that was really vague to a lot of men, and they felt intimidated by it. So they did still say, though, we want to be included. We want you to invite us to this discussion. But for different reasons. So I started looking at the different reasons. And it turns out that if men have a personal engagement in the issue, they will show up. Melissa on my team invited me to come along. Or, you know, my daughter, she's really into math. Oh my God, maybe she's going to go into engineering. Is this the workplace I want her to enter? Other men, they want to show up as better leaders. Or maybe they have a problem that they want to find a solution to that pertains to retention, for example. Stella on my team, you know, the girl who's on the DevOps team, she's really, really good. I think she's going to leave. She doesn't seem happy lately. What can I actually do to make her stick around? Other men will show up out of curiosity. You know, I know it's the right thing to do, this thing with equality, but what can I do to help? So all these reasons would vary, but I started to notice patterns as I was interviewing these men. And I developed a matrix based on 7 composite characters, based on my data. At the top of our matrix, we have the advocates. The advocates are represented by Mark, James, and Samir. They understand the importance of diversity of thought. They care about the business. They care about the people. They understand why their engagement matters so much. They don't care what other people think about them supporting women and minorities. They're intelligent and they're aware of their influence. So Mark, at the top, he's a specialist. He works inside the organization or outside the organization. He could be an HR manager or a diversity consultant, for example. And he can even be a man who has lots of friends. You know, the type of guys that sit down and they actually try to convince other men to hire, retain, and promote women. Not a lot of them out there, but there's some. And they're not really the type of leaders that other men want to follow, but they will listen to him. The next person on the matrix is James. He's a change agent. He's a visible presence in the organization, and he leads by example. He's successful, and he builds teams with good mixes of men and women on them. He's confident, and other men want to be like him. He will lead initiatives that are looking at values of the organization when it comes to equality. And he will say, are these the values that we want to have? Do we set new standards? And then creating strategies to execute against those values and standards. So he's very hands-on. The next person is Samir. And Samir is our sponsor. He is just like James, he's confident and undeterred by what other people's opinions are. And he's determined to support women. And if he finds a woman who has great potential, he will stand behind her and make her visible and promotable by putting his own name on the line. The next category of people on the matrix are the allies. So the allies often have a daughter at home, maybe somebody who's changing the view that they have of women in the workplace, or they've worked on teams with lots of women, and that's been a really successful team, and they feel like they want to be part of building more teams like that. They will speak up on behalf of women, but typically on a one-on-one basis, not in front of a crowd. Memo's our mentor, and Memo will mentor through official programs or on an ad hoc basis, not quite as selflessly as Samir does it. He is sometimes a little bit concerned about his reputation, and he will back away if somebody's questioning his motives. So, Memo, are you having lunch with Lisa? Are you supporting her? And if he's part of an official mentoring program, that would be good for him. Otherwise, he might back away. Al is respectful of women, and he really wants to help, but he doesn't really know how. So he tends to punt the problem to other people. He will say things like, I love women. They're so valuable. But he doesn't necessarily say, I really need to build a diverse team because it's going to drive innovation. He's not quite there yet. Then we have Chris. Chris is friendly, but he's intimidated by the Me Too movement. When he gets uncomfortable or when he has to take sides, he tends to back away. He will support women on an individual basis, though, but preferably women that he knows very well, like his daughter or maybe a woman on his team that he's befriended. He will use these friendships kind of as a shield if somebody's questioning his motives. So, Chris, how come you're acting or behaving that way around Jenny? Oh, we're friends. But he won't speak up or stand up on behalf of a woman. Last on our matrix, we have Richard. He goes by his nickname. He is very insecure, and he prefers status quo. He fears that women are going to replace men in the workplace. I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince Richard to become an ally. I just use him as a reference point. So now that we have our 7 characters on this matrix, what can they do to move equality along and to advance more women to leadership? Well, if you're a man, then you may identify with one of the characters or a combination of characters, and that's a good first step. But you might actually need some suggestions on what you can do to help and support women. So I'm writing a book right now about the Matrix, and it details the characters, and it talks about specific steps that men can take to progress from one level to the next character above him. And that's all based on the interviews that I've conducted. So for example, if you're an Al and you want to become a Memo, what can you realistically do? Well, you can start by listening. You can start by really listening and tuning into what the woman is saying. Maybe she's talking about her challenges. Maybe she has some confrontations at work that she needs to deal with. Maybe she wants to talk about something that's a little bit more of a personal nature. Maybe she has an issue with her manager. So let's say her name is Sylvia, and Sylvia is struggling with the communication with her manager. Al can, with her permission, and only with her permission, actually step in and talk to her manager and see if he can help to improve that communication a little bit. He can also do hands-on things. You know, we've all heard the example of him stepping into the meeting and saying, I want to hear what Julia thinks. Or, you know, last week, Julia had a really good point. Why don't we talk about that? So no matter if the action is grand or if it's small, these are all gestures and actual things that Al is doing to move to the level of Memo. And no matter what character you are, no matter what level you're at, there's always more that you can do as a man to support women in the workplace. The men have to decide themselves, not only what level they're at, but what they want to do to help. And it's really not up to us as co-workers and outside experts to judge or criticize. And judging by some of the men that I see here in the audience, maybe some of you want to be advocates or allies. Maybe you want to be an Al or a Samir, or maybe even a James. At the very least, you don't want to be a Dick, a Richard. What this is, it's really an invitation for you to learn how continuous individual contribution can lead to sustainable change. That means if everybody, all of us, do something, then we can actually start to change things. So with that, I'd like to invite every man who's in the audience and every man who's listening to think about one woman at work who can use a friendly word, who can use a conversation, somebody who wants to share how she's doing with her career and maybe needs some advice. Ask her how you can support her. This will actually be something that Memo would do, and it leads to change. Or maybe you have values that are the same or different than the organization that you're working for when it comes to equality. Sit down and talk about those values. Write them down, and then hire and promote based on those values. That's what James would do. Now, if you're a woman, you can, if you're successful, you feel like you've really reached somewhere in your career, I'd like to encourage you to identify an Al or a Chris, because you can coach them and mentor them to become allies of women. And Chris and Al have the greatest potential to grow into stronger supporters of equality. If you're a woman who's struggling and you're not feeling seen or valued in your organization, I suggest that you try to identify a James or a Samir, because they can actually help you to move along to the next step. So I know as a woman, we're very angry, and it's kind of natural right now that we want to expose and shame and punish a lot of men that have been misusing their power for a lot of years. And that's fine. But what comes next? How do we reach equality? How do we work together to achieve those goals? Punishment and deterrence are just not going to be enough. We need positive, redemptive action in order to create that sustainable change by all. So with that, I'd like to share a story. Early on in my career, about 20 years ago or so, I was working for a Samir, and he was a fantastic manager who taught me everything I needed to know. And he coached me, and he watched out for me. He backed me up. He made me shine. And then one day, we were at a trade show in Las Vegas, and we're walking back from the event, and one of the distributors kind of leans over and in and whispers something sleazy in my ear. And later on that day, I told Samir, I said, this has happened. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? You never need to do business with anybody who makes you feel uncomfortable. And I thought, okay. And I didn't even understand the impact of those words. I navigated through the tech industry for 20 years after that with those words in my head. You never need to do business with anybody who makes you feel uncomfortable. And there are more Samirs out there than we could ever fathom. There are men that want to support us and support equality in the workplace. There are men that have a daughter at home who's changing their view of women in the workplace. There are men who claim that their best managers ever have been women. And there are men that want to work side by side with us and that truly believe in equality. All they need is a little encouragement and some practical advice. And I hope that this presentation today has provided a start to that. Thank you.